Overthinking is strange. It doesn't really feel like a decision. It just starts. Maybe someone says something that annoys you. Maybe you send a message you regret. Maybe you make a mistake at work. Or maybe nothing happens at all. And somehow, before you even realize it, you're thinking. Then thinking about your thinking. Then wondering why you can't stop thinking. The interesting thing is, I don't think most of us even believe it's helping. Halfway through replaying the same conversation for the 20th time, it doesn't really feel useful anymore. You're not making a decision, you're not solving a problem, you're just thinking. And yet, it feels almost impossible to stop. I used to assume that overthinking happened because life was complicated, that some people just had more problems to solve than others. But the more I've paid attention, the less convinced I am, because I'm sure you've noticed that halfway through overthinking, you almost forget what started it. One thought reminds you of another. That reminds you of something someone said 3 years ago, which somehow reminds you of a conversation you might have next week. Then you're imagining what you'll say, how they'll respond, what you'll do after that. 20 minutes later, you're worrying about something completely different, which made me wonder, if I'm not actually solving anything, why does it feel so difficult to stop? It feels like we're trying to get somewhere without ever really knowing where there is. So where is there? What is it we're actually trying to reach? At first, I thought the answer was certainty, that perhaps we keep thinking because we're trying to become completely sure. Sure we made the right decision. Sure people don't secretly dislike us. Sure tomorrow will be okay. And that made a lot of sense to me because certainty feels comforting. If we could somehow know exactly how everything was going to turn out, perhaps we could finally relax. But then I noticed something. Even when I became certain about one thing, my mind didn't stop. It simply found something else. I could finally decide whether to send the message, and within seconds, I'd be wondering whether I'd worded it correctly. It almost felt like certainty wasn't the destination after all, because every time I thought I'd reached it, it quietly disappeared again. Which made me wonder if certainty isn't actually something the mind can ever find, because life doesn't really work that way. We don't know exactly what tomorrow will bring. We don't know exactly what other people are thinking. We don't know how every decision will turn out. Maybe uncertainty isn't a mistake. Maybe it's just part of being alive. And if that's true, perhaps the mind has been trying to solve something that can't actually be solved. Then something else occurred to me. Have you ever noticed that there are moments when you're not thinking? Not because you've solved every problem, not because life has suddenly become certain, just because for a few seconds your attention is completely somewhere else. Watching a sunset, playing with a dog, laughing so hard with friends that for a moment you completely forget yourself. Nothing about your life has changed. Tomorrow is still uncertain. That awkward conversation still happened. your inbox still exists, and yet, for those few moments, the weight disappears. I think this is a really crucial observation, because if overthinking was caused by our problems, those moments shouldn't exist. The problems are still there, but somehow the overthinking isn't. So, what if the goal isn't to stop thinking? Because I'm pretty sure thinking isn't the problem. Thinking is incredibly useful. It's how we learn, how we solve problems, how we remember birthdays. Without thought, life would probably be very difficult. So perhaps this was never about getting rid of thought. Maybe it's about noticing that we don't have to follow every thought that appears. Because I'm sure you've noticed that thoughts don't really ask for permission, they just arrive. You don't sit there deciding, I think I'll worry about that embarrassing thing I did 5 years ago. It just appears. Then another thought appears, and another. This is important, because if we don't choose the next thought, why do we feel like we have to go wherever it leads? Imagine you're sitting beside a road. Cars drive past all day. Some are noisy, some are quiet, some are old, some are new. You notice them, and then they disappear. Now imagine, every time a car drove past, you jumped in. It wouldn't matter where it was going, you'd just get in, because it happened to arrive. It sounds ridiculous, but I wonder if that's a little bit like what we do with our thoughts. One thought appears, and off we go. Another appears, and off we go again. Sometimes for hours. And because we've done it for so long, we assume that's the only way to live. But every now and then, something happens. Maybe you're watching your favorite movie. Maybe you're surfing or swimming in the ocean. Maybe you're completely absorbed in a piece of music. And for just a moment, the thoughts don't seem so important. Not because you've forced them away, not because you've finally solved your life. They simply lost their grip. Which poses the question, what changed? It wasn't the world. Your problems didn't suddenly disappear. Tomorrow is still tomorrow. Your responsibilities are still there. The only thing that changed was your relationship with your thoughts. And perhaps that's the subtle shift. Maybe freedom doesn't come from making sure the mind never thinks again. Maybe freedom comes from realizing we don't have to climb aboard every single thought that passes by. Here's a question to consider. How do you know you're overthinking? How do you know your mind won't stop? Something must already be noticing it. The thoughts are constantly changing. One minute they're about work, the next they're about money, then your relationships, then what you should cook for dinner. The thoughts never stay the same, but the fact that you notice them does. So maybe that's why those peaceful moments feel so different. Not because they give us something new, but because for a brief moment we stop believing that every thought deserves our attention. I don't know about you, but I find that strangely comforting, because it means We don't have to win some endless battle against the mind. We don't have to wait until we've solved every possible future. And we don't have to try and understand every mistake from the past. So perhaps the question was never, how do I stop overthinking? Perhaps the better question is, do I really have to believe every thought that appears? And I think just noticing that those are two different things is where everything begins to change.